thus fostering a transdisciplinary thinking and possibility to exchange. And before I hand over the mic back to you, Daniel, I would really deeply like to thank once more the great team at the Center for Information Technology and Public Life of the University of Northern California. Sorry. Because the sun and blue sky really make me feel like Northern California. No, of North Carolina, of course, at Chapel Hill, UNC Global Affairs, the UNC Center for European Studies, and the UNC School of Information and Library Science for their generous support in this first, but hopefully not last, collaboration between our institution. And personally, I would also like to thank Corbin Davis and Felicity, there she is, Gansil from UNC, as well as Clara Tang, our project coordinator at the Thomas Mann House, for their enthusiasm and amazing job that you have done. Thank you so much. Back to you, and have a great conversation.
Not the fun part. So I want to invite our two panelists up to the stage. And I'm going to do just a quick intro, and then we're going to jump into it. By the way, I apologize, there is no fire. We're going to work on that. Maybe next time. That would just set the mood. And by the way, there's seats up front. For folks sitting in the back, there are seats, no pressure. Whatever you're vibing with is good with me. All right, so so first, we are very honored to have Juliane Schäuble. She's a US correspondent of Der Tagesspiegel, Berlin's biggest newspaper. She moved to DC in June 2018. Before that, she was the head of the political department of the paper, where she was responsible for both the front page and the political section. She has more than 12 years experience in business and the political department, and she earned a master's in political science at the University in Potsdam in Germany. Really excited to have Juliane here to give us the perspective on US elections through the lens of the eyes of a German correspondent. And then also my friend and colleague, Dr. Tressie McMillan Cottom. Tressie, for those of you who don't know, is an award-winning author, professor, and sociologist. She most recently was the 2023 winner of the Joseph B. and Toby Gittler Prize by Brandeis University for her critical perspective and analysis of some of the greatest challenges we face today. She's a 2020 MacArthur Fellow. She's a New York Times columnist. Most importantly, she's a principal investigator at the Center for Information Technology and Public Life, and also a professor over in the School of Information and Library Sciences. She is the author of 2 books, Lower Ed and Thick. We have copies of Thick back there for you for free. Please grab a copy on your way out or now, or just this book is amazing, and I think it really captures Tressie's work in a nutshell, which is how she translates academic work through the lens of publicly engaged writing on the biggest issues of our time, and gives us a window into understanding the often hidden invisible social structures that shape our lives. So it's a great book. Please grab a copy and connect after the panel. Okay, so what are we going to do today? Y'all have been talking for 2 days, right? So what I asked our Fireside Chat guests to do is to just open with a short response to a few questions as a way to get us going. And the questions that we sort of laid out here was, what do you see the primary way that American and German, as well as international news media, are covering this election here in the US? And that includes what issues and topics are most salient, what are the stakes of the election that are being sort of told in the media, and most importantly, too, what is missing from our current public discourse? Juliane, I'll start with you. Just press the button. Yeah.
That's one. Hello. Thank you for having me. It was a short trip from DC, and it's good to be in a swing state that is so crucial for this election, even though I didn't do any research yet. I'm happy to be here. And maybe I start with the last question first. What is missing? And I would say it is missing to talk about a lot of crucial issues in this presidential debates. And that's as a German journalist, it starts with foreign policy. It starts with the world that is upside down in some parts. Continents we don't even talk about, climate change and issues like that. You don't have that in debates. You don't have that on a daily basis. That is huge because it doesn't fit in maybe 30-second clips and headlines, and that's something that is not unique to the US. We have that in Germany too. I think we also had debates before our past elections where foreign policy did not play a huge role. That is something that is kind of hard to understand when you're trying to do to be a foreign correspondent and covering international relations. What always strikes me is, and I can't really fight against it either, how personalized we are talking about this election. It's so much about the persona. It's so much about, just take yesterday, the CNN town hall of the vice president, how she looks, how is she nervous, is she talking enough about herself, and it's the issues are not as important as how somebody is on stage, and that gets more and more and more. And I'm sure Donald Trump doesn't help with this in this aspect. I would have to count my articles without the name Donald Trump in the last 6.5 years. I wrote about turtles in South Carolina, and that was for sure without Donald Trump. But so much of our political coverage includes him, and we have to talk about him. We have to talk about his last things he says when he compares when he wishes he has generals like Adolf Hitler. In German, you really get a creepy feeling with that, and that's really. But it's very often this feeling of you know it better and you still have to do it. And for a journalist, that's not really easy. And we also, of course, have to earn money. So we also have to do something people are actually going to read. But I don't believe people just want to read short snaps of newsletters. I think they want to read stories. And that's what we still have to do. And I mean, in this country, you have amazing journalists. One is sitting next to me. And I know many in DC and in the country. And especially local journalism out there. Every single time I get out there, I was in Montana last week, and it's just amazing what you can learn and understand if you leave this bubble we all are in DC.
So thank you, first of all, for those wonderful comments. Always a pleasure to be here with my colleagues and very good friends. I'm very fortunate that they people are with us both. Juliane, thank you very much for being here and giving me the honor of your presence and peerage. All right, so Daniel put forth some questions, and I've got too many things I want to say. So I want to start with saying I agree with everything you just said. That way we can cut all of that out. No, seriously, I mean, I will draw on reflections here, both from being like an academic who thinks about these things. I'm a teacher who teaches about these things. And then I sit in the editorial meetings and I write and think about these things, I'm a journalist. And so that's sort of like this big stew, sort of moving around in my mind these days. And I think the first thing, I just want to be really emphatic and clear, if I could. I think one of the primary challenges is that the way media and electoral behavior are structured, both in this country and in our relationship to the rest of the world, it incentivizes the idea that elections are horse races. And one of the challenges, and one of the things that Donald Trump and Trumpism, I would say more broadly, because I think now he's like this sort of institutionalized figure, is that politics, is a rhetoric, it is an approach. That one of the things that has been able to capitalize on is that horse race politics and a horse race framing is wholly ill-suited for the political contest that we have going on. That I would argue is not even actually only a political contest. I think that we have a cultural, economic transformation and challenge happening, and the horse race politics framing is just very anemic in the face of the scale of those challenges. For example, we know when we sit in an editorial meeting, I was just in one yesterday, where we were thinking about how our lives change and doing scenario planning based on the next couple of weeks and the elections. We know for a fact that Donald Trump is not a regular political candidate, right? We know, and I'm going to say, at least I know, that this election is not actually between the Democrats and the Republicans. We have one person who absolutely believes in dismantling the government for which he is seeking to lead on behalf of all kinds of economic and political interests. And then we have somebody who's actually running to be president of the United States of America, right? So the problem there is that we do know that, but then our daily jobs become engaging with people in a way that is built on us understanding polls and and attitude and beliefs among the electorate. And really, that is just not really what we are dealing with here. And it is difficult in this media environment. I think I want to say that. I think in this media environment, yes, to know that and to write about it as emphatically and consistently and powerfully as I think we should be writing about it, so that we can spark in readers the serious stakes involved in this election. And I think that is true no matter kind of where you are on the political spectrum, because if you're on the other side and you are, voting for and hoping for Donald Trump to win, you are still then looking down a huge cultural transformation. So on either side, I think the stakes are pretty high. We tend to talk about the stakes on the Democrat side, but I would argue that there are stakes on the Republican side as well. They need to decide if they're still going to be a political party. They need to decide who's going to lead that political party. They need to decide if they are trying to lead the government or they are trying to dismantle the government. The stakes are also high for them. And we don't talk about that because I don't think that we have the tools to do that when we're also like poll watching. If you can't tell, I'm over polls. So that's one thing. Yeah, I'm really over that. Yeah, I have to read them, I have to keep track of them, and I'm a little done. Because as Juliane said, one of the things is that I don't think polling is the only and best tool we have for, again, a very unique contest. It is certainly useful, but our understanding of how useful they are, I think, is not keeping up with reality. And then I also want to double down on the second thing, which is, Donald Trump is ill-equipped, unfit to lead, but may very well win. And I want to talk about why I think that is. I think on one level, it's important to know that the way electoral politics in this country are set up, especially after 30 years of concerted effort to make it this way, a Republican is winning as much as Donald Trump is winning. Right? This is set up for a Republican candidate to be competitive, kind of no matter what the popular sentiment is. Donald Trump is benefiting from that. I think the actual story is, why isn't Donald Trump bad enough to tank the structure that is set up for a Republican candidate to be competitive, right? Why isn't his, convicted sex crimes, his other legalities, why isn't his boorish behavior, why isn't that enough to undermine a Republican candidacy? That to me speaks more to the structure of electoral politics and the problem there. Because Donald Trump is the candidate now, but whoever it is they decide to put up next, and J.D. Vance, right? Whoever they decide to put forward next will benefit from that structure. And one of the things Donald Trump, I think, has evidence is that he's stress tested. You can be as bad as Donald Trump, and as long as you're a Republican, you are still competitive. And I think that should be an argument we're putting before the American people and asking them whether or not that is the type of, if that matches their idea of participatory democracy. One of the reasons why I think Donald Trump is not dangerous enough to people to tank a Republican candidacy is because we do not have a language or a framework in our media, in our popular discourse, and in some factions of, I think, our academic discourse to talk about how climate is changing everything. So this absence to me of talking about climate, by the way, I actually do think that is very much linked to our current political climate. Because if you think about what climate is, I think it is domestic, and foreign policy. I think our fears about how climate will incentivize migration is at the heart of the xenophobia and the racism upon which Donald Trump is able to build his coalition. I think the impulses behind this is a very much gendered election, as many of my colleagues have pointed out. But I would argue that even that impulse to return to a nostalgic politics is about this dawning fear we have about our inability or unwillingness to deal with the political reality of climate change. And so I think the absence of that from the discourse is a crisis on many levels. And one of the biggest ones is that just because it is absent does not mean it isn't a powerful force in the discourse. And so I wish more of us had the language, including myself, to talk about climate in ways for everyday politics as well as electoral politics. And I wish we had more people contextualizing what I think is that reality, which is that climate is domestic and foreign policy. And I think our fears about climate are at the root of sort of the racist, patriarchal, xenophobic impulses that have shifted the electoral landscape.
I mean, amazing. Just so like, I'm gonna try to take myself out of this as much as possible, just to clear you up. So I wanted to start because there's so much to tease out, but I wanted to start with a version of the same problem that both of you articulated in different ways. You both talked about there being what we would used to call path journalism, right? So Tressie talked about following the polls. Juliane talked about the lack of climate change, the fact that you have to cover Trump, et cetera. What I find extraordinary about this is that there's been incredible changes in media over the last 30, 40 years. And there's massive changes in media environments, new influencers, new outlets, podcasts, social media, where in theory, we should have many different forms of conversation. We should have new agendas. If both of you are articulating this problem that we don't have a substantively different agenda than what we've seen in the course of American history, horse race journalism and journalism that does not deal well with foreign affairs, does not do well stepping outside of a set of narrow restrictions of how we cover races. The question is why? Like, what are those pressures? Why do you feel compelled to cover Trump in those ways? Why do you feel compelled at the New York Times to be following the polls at the nation's elite newspaper?
I mean, one thing is that people are reading it. It's
There you go.
not that articles with Joe Biden in the headlines have clicked very well in the last 4 years. And I remember when after January 21st, when Trump left DC, I was standing in front of the White House and was watching all these people clapping and applauding. Then my newspaper was kind of like, well, look, you're going to have a quiet time now because there's not much interest. And I said, well, you can say that, but I don't believe it. But it is true. People, I mean, there's so much written and research about social media, but somehow people want to read something that they can get emotions about. And apparently it doesn't have to be good emotions. Something like, oh my goodness, why can people be so stupid and vote for this guy? How can he have said that? These things people are still reading it. It's not that we are only forcing that on you all. It's I'm sure you're not reading all these articles, but we are doing good stuff. That's not what I'm saying. We are really trying to analyze what is said, what is done, what is not done. But we put statistics in everything. And I think this country is extraordinarily good in doing that, but it also has the downsides. We are analyzing what is read, what headline takes best, what first sentences work, and all our ways of having written feature stories in the past, I've been like, well, this is too long. Nobody is going to read a 4-page story from Montana. I said, well, I can't write a short story in two sentences. So I need a little bit of space to explain the thing. So it's all ourselves. I'm not always blaming the other person, and we are less concentrated on reading longer stories. People read less books. I think everybody knows that and most people, maybe even ourselves, that we get distracted quickly. We need be engaged, get new information, get new emotions, and that is part of the deal too. And Trump kind of fits into that. He's feeding us. I mean, yes, you can say, who cares that he says the name Adolf Hitler? I don't really care. I mean, I'm not changing my opinion on him just because of what he says. But if everybody else covers it, then even Kamala Harris seems to be under the pressure of replying to this question: is he a fascist or not?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, so maybe a little window, maybe here into how it works might be helpful. You know, I try to write those things. I mentioned Juliane, I try to write these things that I think matter. I try to do them in a accessible but complex way that, you know, caters to context. But I'm gonna be real with you, I can get away with that on occasion precisely because that's not my only job, right? And so the professional impulses there to do what everybody else is doing, to be part of the discourse that my professional colleagues are having, to not be late to the conversation, aren't quite as urgent for me. But I am in the room with people for whom it is very urgent. You know, I tell my editor doesn't tell me how my stories perform. I never want to know because I don't want to write to the audience. I don't want to write to the data points. But that's a luxury I have, right? I mean, you know, I'm gonna teach tomorrow, it's fine. But the reality is, the economic reality anyway, of news, even at the New York Times, believe it or not, which is deeply invested in and concerned about both the changes in media and its place in the changing landscape of media. Deeply panicked about the shrinking media landscape, even though the New York Times continues to take up, you know, an outside share of that media landscape. But the reality is there are fewer people reading. One of those metrics I don't like to know about my articles is whether or not they read to the end. I think it's depressing. And I don't want to know, because my best stuff, by the way, is always at the end. I get you there, and then I'm like, there you go. But and so it's sad for me to think that people don't see it. But that's a statistic that drives, which means then you want it punchy and you want everything at the top. And do you know who is excellent at that? Donald Trump is excellent at that. He has played the incentives and fears of the media environment like a fiddle. And even when we know it, we can't stop dancing to his tune. That's how good it is. I think, you know, I like a lot of the participatory media. I think there are problems there with, like, you know, media ethics and professionalization and all of that. But I want to shout out the fact that, I mean, I think I get some of the best contextual journalism, especially about local politics, given the absence and the destruction of local journalism from, like, I was on a podcast and have become very good friends with a local outlet called Hometown Holler, who covers rural politics across the state. I follow people on social media and TikTok, Caroline Ford, and these people who are doing deep contextual work. And I asked them when we sit down, like, how are they even able to do this, right? You know, all of it being subsidized by someone in their life. And that is both the small and the big story of media. Somebody's got to subsidize the stuff that people don't want to read until there is an emergency. And unfortunately, the economics of it right now are that we really only want to publish the things that people want to read, not the things they need to know.
Please.
Not on purpose.
You're welcome.
I would say we do both. I mean, we have a climate change podcast that is very successful too in my newspaper. We have local newsletters that are really going into the little parts of Berlin. We call it Selbstberichterstattung in old days, and it was expensive to have that, so we do this over newsletters. But my editors say, and I don't think they think the same as us. They say we need to do the mainstream stuff. We need to do the news. We need to earn the money in order to also do what we always like. And that's where we are. I mean, we have changed about in my newspaper for foreign reporting. In my job has changed. In any article I write, if it's not an opinion piece, which we are allowed to write, as a reporter, I have to quote experts. I have to talk to experts, which is it's sometimes normal, but we have to do that. So the reporting doesn't get worse. I think the reporting is good. It's just we are producing so much more information. It's an information overkill. I don't know how it's for you when you don't look into your email. How many emails have popped up in the last 10 minutes? So we are reading, but we can't consume that many information. So of course, sometimes we just read axios and headlines and shorter stuff because it's easy. It makes it easy.
So you made a case for why the structure of the media environment, both its professional practices, but also its economics, benefits the Republican candidate. But I want to return to something that you said, Tressie, and I'm going to ask you to go first, but I also want Juliane to start with this as well. You laid out an extraordinary theory of the election, that structurally the country is set up, in essence, to favor a Republican candidacy. And I want to ask you to elaborate more on that, both in terms of the structural systems piece, but also the institutional ones, right? Who gets represented by the contemporary Republican Party coalition? And why is that set up in a way to interact with the various structure of the Electoral College, et cetera, to benefit a Republican candidacy at this moment? Because I think that's a powerful theory of the election. And I know that's in your writing as well. And after Tressie, Juliane, I'd love for you to also sort of lay out what you see as your theory of the election, sort of as well, through the lens of a German correspondent covering it.
All right. So I think one little factor that I recently put in a piece, I had to triple check because I thought, well, that can't be right. And one of those. And is that every independent redistricting commission in the country was put in place by a Democrat. Right, there's one party that is trying to facilitate democratic participation. But this is 2024, so in about 55 years of trying to restrict that participation on the other side. Some of that with the Electoral College, a lot of that happening, however, through the judiciary. Where for many reasons, the Democrats just simply have not paid as much attention to and haven't done as well. Don't seem to have the same sort of long range strategy there. And one of the things that I think happened that Donald Trump benefited from and perhaps will continue to benefit from is that all of that seemed to come to fruition at the same time. Right? All these things have been happening, fits and starts, redistricting, gerrymandering challenges. But once you have the judiciary, those challenges become more consistently in your favor. They start to accrue, right? And they start to catch up with each other. I think that demoralizes and undermines the sort of get out the vote operations and people's efficacy to vote. I think that's one of the things that we see across the South, which is why the Democrats continue to over-rely on the minority vote in their coalition, because we are motivated by something usually other than how easy it is. We have always found it difficult to vote. And so we have a cultural practice of that. But if you do not have a cultural practice of it being difficult to vote, and you have been demoralized for the last 20 years as it has become harder for your vote to feel like it counts, I think that has an effect on people's participation. I think that explains, in my mind anyway, some of the energy gap, the enthusiasm gap between the two parties. Something I'm struck by is that Kamala Harris is an historic candidate. Historic. She will, if she wins, will be the woman, a Black woman, a woman of color, something this country has said it could never do, that she would do it with the shortest election ramp up in modern electoral politics would be huge, that she has been so successful at running money, just as an indicator of her being a traditional institutional candidate. Her ability to raise money indicates that she has that institutional cachet, and yet we still can't quite close, I think, the enthusiasm gap, the idea of something that Americans usually love about themselves, social progress. I think some of that is about how her campaign has positioned herself to de-emphasize that, but I think some of it is about the fact that for, a very long time, we vote for that candidate that we think is a change candidate, and not much changes. That's what I hear when I talk to people. I don't go to diners, so then I believe in that. But I mean, you go to beauty shop, you go to places where I think real regular people hang out. one of the things I think across, across gender and across race, and maybe not across class, by the way, I think class matters a lot here. People just feel like I have done the right thing, and it has not mattered, right? And when you have that sort, and some of that, they don't understand the structural reasons for that. They don't understand it's because of who has power in Congress, and they don't understand how the judiciary works. What they know is, I voted when you told me to vote, and nothing seems to have changed about my material reality, and I don't feel better about it. And Trump at this moment has a better message for them, at least a clearer message, to explain why and how that works. Whereas I think on the other side, we try to explain the process to people. And it's really hard for me to convince my colleagues that people don't care about the process. They care about the outcomes of the process, but we care about the process. So we go and we pay attention to it, and we should as part of our jobs, but I don't think we pay enough attention to what it is people are willing to consume and hear. And I don't think they have done a very good, to your point, a theory of like electoral politics to explain how is it you can win a popular vote and lose? That confused the heck out of people. Like, and how have we not done a better job of explaining how that works? Just continues to stun me. So I think there's a couple. So that's my long answer to a very good question, by the way. Thank you.
I would also say, I think this country is more conservative than many people think.
Absolutely.
When you look, I mean, that's the first thing you learn when you come here. It was my first time coming to the US when I became a correspondent. I was also a high school student in Texas. Born to New Mexico, the First Baptist family, wonderful people, they're already dead, unfortunately, but they were very welcoming, and she was voting Democrat, he was voting Republican, no problem back then, on good talk. But religion plays a totally different role than it does in Europe. When you look at polls, a majority of Americans think the idea of mass deportation of illegal refugees is not bad. So Trump is not that stupid. He knows where the votes are. He kind of always knew that the abortion question is a dangerous question for him. He was not in favor of Roe v. Wade being overruled by the Supreme Court, as colleagues of us have written, and I believe that. I think he has an instinct of what clicks really. He's not conservative. He's not an ideologist. He's just a player, and he uses what he thinks brings him the majority. The tragedy is that the Republican Party has lost itself by now, and so many people. I just was in Montana and spoke to a former Republican governor, Mike Roscoe, who is campaigning for John Tester, the Democratic senator, and he's like this Cheney. They say, I have not changed. I'm still conservative. I still don't like to pay taxes. I think Washington shouldn't overreach. But the party has changed. The party has abandoned us. And the party is not a conservative party. The party is a movement, a cult, in many parts. And it was very interesting. I was in New York 2 days ago, and like a German-American environment, and there was an American businesswoman, successful, eloquent, and she clearly was clear that she's Republican. And at some point afterwards, she said, "We don't want politicians. Politicians have failed us. We don't want that politician in the White House anymore. That's why we are for Trump and J.D. Vance." And then it's so crystal clear. We are talking two different languages. I want a good politician in the White House as a citizen, or in the Chancellery in Germany, somebody who knows how to make compromises, somebody who knows how to get solutions. Donald Trump doesn't want that. Donald Trump wants to stay in power, and he doesn't want to end up in prison. I think that's the most motivating argument for him.
That's an important point, yeah.
And he wants to make money too. I would sort of add that, right, as well. I think maybe let me ask one more, and then we'll sort of open the floor, because there's a lot of people smarter than me in the room. So you all spoke to this in various ways, but I wanted to tease it out. It's the role of race, it's the role of class, it's the role of religion in this election, both in the context of how you see this structuring, shaping voters and their choices, and the lenses through which they're evaluating these candidates, but also this moment in history. And then also the role of media in this, like is media coverage capturing sort of these various currents, the historic nature of this election? Are we telling a clear story, right, to our audiences and our citizens about these much larger forces in American political life? How would you sort of assess that? How do you think about the role of these varying social groups and varying social powers sort of at play at this moment in American history?
It's important for you to know that I am at heart a crass materialist. I think people mostly vote and act in their material self-interest, and to the extent that anything buffers that, it is because like racism and sexism are just that bad. But when those things start to feel a little more elastic to you, you see it. I think it's what we see in the slight pulling away, for example, of Black men and Latino male voters for Donald Trump. When the overwhelming sort of like oppression just feels a little less oppressive, people default to their material interests. So you need to know how much that is going to shape my answer, and that not everybody agrees with me, and that's fine. But I think it bears out in some of the anomalies that we're seeing currently in this election. I think it bears out in like the last two elections, actually. I think it's one of the reasons why the Democratic Party feels itself like struggling to capture a Black vote for the first time. I mean, they're still gonna get like 85–90% of us, but the messaging isn't quite there. And that seems a little uncommon for the Democratic Party, especially given the very dangerous candidate on the other side. And so I think one of the things that we're seeing in this election is what happens when the language of class is atrophied to the point of being irrelevant and missing in the discourse. And I say this as somebody who, again, I say racist and sexist all day, every day. I say it in the grocery store, I stun people, I forget that you're not supposed to say it in polite discourse, it's fine. And so it's not that I don't think those things exist, but we have a language for that. We may not agree on the terms of the debate, right? But we do have a language about it. And I find in this country, what we do not have a language for is class. And one of the things that has changed the most for people over the last 20 or 30 years is that they think they are middle class, but they feel working class. And those distinctions are invisible to them in the media and the reflection of the consumer choices available to them. They can consume, right? But they can't buy food, right? And so they can't reconcile those things for themselves. And I tend to think that one of the roles of media is to provide the public a repertoire from which to pull to help them explain things, right? And we have a racial repertoire. We've got a repertoire on gender. I think, I would even argue, I think we have a slightly better at this point repertoire on sexuality, and certainly a better one on religion. We don't have one on class. And I think that's a real problem when the overwhelming threat to people's everyday life is really rooted in these changes to their material reality.
Just ask a quick follow-up.
Yeah.
So we're all sitting in North Carolina, right? I'm sure some of us watch live TV, streaming TV. So complementing this materialist basis are all the ads that I see from the Trump team. That's all about Kamala's for they, them,
Yeah.
not for us.
Yeah.
It's about violence among immigrants, right? It's about the disinformation about Springfield. So how do we square that circle? It's
the same
is that
thing.
materialist
You know,
mapping
yeah.
out the?
There's a, I hope it's out, if not, I'm here right now, but whatever. We just did a roundtable, they do these roundtables, you New York Times opinion with voters, and it's been an ongoing series of talking to voters about how they're gonna make their political decisions. And they ran some of those ads for a roundtable recently to see how they landed. And they landed quite well with the people in that room. A mix of Democrats, Republicans, quote unquote undecided, which I don't believe in, but that's fine. They think of themselves being undecided. And those, especially the they them ad, landed with them quite well, and the one about inflation landed well. And I'm gonna point that out because I think those are landing for the exact same reason, right? So if you do not have a language to talk about how and I hate to use economic anxiety, I'm gonna say, you know, changing economic fortunes, then you do think the problem is immigration, right? You do think the problem is borders, and you do think the problem is that people are having too many babies, or the wrong people are having too many babies, I should say. I mean, it becomes a very easy solution for a complex problem when you don't have any other language. A friend of mine likes to say something that I think has been very helpful for me. He said, far more people have the right instincts than they have the right analysis. A lot of people have the right instincts. Something is being done to them. Something is happening. What they have is the wrong analysis. And when you have the wrong analysis, it's very easy, I think. I mean, this is a story really of like American life, certainly since slavery, and absolutely since Jim Crow, which is to tell people who is responsible for the problems in your life. Donald Trump does it very well. He's able to manipulate a media environment that is then incentivized to promote it and amplify it, to speak about our role in that, and how I think media infrastructure matters there. But so part of this is an old playbook, and some of it's just about, I would agree, his very excellent instinct about what will terrify people in the right way.
I think racism and sexism is still there. I heard somebody, a man from Virginia, saying that a woman cannot do this. I mean, she's just not made to be president. Which I said, okay, I mean, we had 16 years attached in Germany, it kind of never really was an issue if she's a man or woman. It's still there. But it's, I mean, it's also true that the role of money in this election is probably still totally underreported. We know it, we see it, it gets worse. Now it's $1 million you can get for your, it's extraordinary that everybody said, well, that's how it is, we can't really change it. It's like,
yeah, that's why I said that asterisk earlier about Kamala Harris raising the money. I'm actually disgusted. I can't believe we talk about $1 billion. And I think that's a problem, but we're supposed to cheer, and that's fine.
yeah, it all goes into the same corners of this country. That's also, I mean, how often have I been in Pennsylvania? Did I want to go to Pennsylvania that often? No. Not provide as much time. No, it's a circle.
I thought that $1 billion came from me giving $3 to
Yeah,
all those
yeah, it was
texts.
totally you.
Like every day. I love the idea, well, I don't love the idea, but this idea that things fill in that gap of analysis and things lend themselves to that misanalysis in ways that are politically advantageous to some, right, and not others. So I promised I would hand things over, but just so I think like I always want to leave things in like a better note, but like, how do we give voice to that language of class then, right? Like, how do we articulate that material language that helps people understand this moment in a way that sharpens that analysis and gets us beyond that instinct, because so much fills that void.
I am probably the only formerly poor person writing at the New York Times today. I'm certainly probably the only person, I started my career talking about student loan debt. I was the only person in those rooms every time we would ever actually have student loan. I'm the only person at the New York Times opinion desk who has come from a non-elite institution. I went to a historically black college down the road here, North Carolina Central University. So not to over extrapolate from myself, but I would point out the fact that you get the stories that people know how to see.
And we have new programs. It already started, and we have a lot of refugees coming up in 2015. My newspaper started today really actively looking for different candidates for coming as training and young reporters. We need to encourage them. People who, and now we have a program for people who did not go to college, because you don't have to have a PhD to become a journalist. You need people who are actually know what they're, who are interested in issues that we can't be all out of the same college. I don't even think you can. I mean, studying journalism is a theoretical thing, but in the end, it's so much about going out there and doing the job and listening to people, to ask the right questions, and be critical. And that's something you learn in many ways of being educated. And the same with women. I mean, how many women did I want to promote? And I said, no, I don't want to do it because I don't want to be in the middle of the women speak. I'm afraid of conflicts. I said, no, we have to go out there and take over and do it because men do it too. So you always have to encourage people. But you also have to actively look for another kind of circle of people to enlarge your reporting and then your audience. And then suddenly you have people that came from Turkey, who are up in Berlin and read the newspaper, and that's what you want. If not, you have a shrinking readership because we are shrinking.
That is exactly right.
Right,
That's positive, right?
yeah, well, I mean, it's an analysis, let's say that, yeah.
Yeah, my name is Juliane Schäuble. I'm a visiting professor at UNC. And I'm very happy I see Juliane Schäuble here in person. We've been on German TV together. And I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your excellent reporting about the United States and the elections. Thursday is my favorite day because you always report on Thursdays from different states of the US. And what I really like is that you go out of the bubble, right? You don't stay at the East Coast, you go everywhere, cross country, and you talk to many different people. My question is, because I myself often ask, how do you explain to Germans, really, can Trump be elected? I mean, how can people be so stupid and so uneducated to elect someone like Donald Trump? That is kind of the question I get a lot in Germany, and you have to explain a lot. But I would like to know from your ethics as a journalist, do you feel like you have to report in a balanced way? Or do you feel like you have to report in a critical way, that someone who is often labeled, very far extreme right, maybe fascist, as we discussed this morning, to kind of dismantle, deconstruct what he says, what he does? What is your ethical kind of guideline on that?
I think what we should do is always be critical, especially when we connect more with one side than the other side. So it's in the last month, people in Germany were sure Kamala Harris is going to win the election, and I said, I'm not. It's because nothing is really going to change the 49 to 51 outcome as we have seen, even when Obama is on the ticket. So I wrote a book with my colleague Annette Meiritz on the conservative women's movement before Roe v. Wade came down, not because we liked talking about how can you restrict anything we do, but because we want to get these answers. Why don't you have a problem with somebody like Donald Trump? Why are you doing this? What is motivating you? And I think knowledge is the beginning of everything. If you understand why somebody does something, and people are actually think that they can talk about it, then maybe they reflect on it. I think when people are not willing to talk about it, it's even worse. I think that. I think we need to be to write about that. That's our job as a journalist. With Trump, it is difficult. And I also say I'm also a human being. I also lived in the US for 6.5 years. I was here in the pandemic. I saw him acting and endangering lives. So I think my mom was always my compass. She said, don't become don't concentrate on him too much to get rid of him. I said, no, but it's when you live here, you feel the threat that he does pose to many people. And I'm white, I'm not black. So I think it's also, it always depends on where you live. But it's a constant, there's not one clear guideline. I don't think you can stop talking to Republicans and call them out of the normal discussion, because then you have a large part of the electorate out of the discussion. And we have the same discussion in Germany with the AfD. People might vote for a party that we think should not belong to parliament, but that doesn't stop us talking to these people. Why are you doing this? What are your fears? And maybe your fears are wrong. people in Germany are most afraid of migration when they don't even have migration. So that's what we constantly have to do. It's not easy, but that's the ethic that we have to have. We have to be curious. Even if the discussions are not easy. It's easier to talk to Democratic voters and to go to Democratic rallies than to Trump rallies right now. It's not fun.
No, it is not. Then,
There's a million questions. Let's see, are you?
Yes, I'm switching.
So I see Sharon, I see one, two, and two in the back. Yeah.
Oh, again. Press the button.
Yes. Thanks, guys. Hit like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you both so much for this wonderful discussion. Okay, I have a couple questions, but I'm just gonna ask one. So I'm really interested in this idea of, sort of this material aspect of that you're talking about, Tressie, in terms of the theory of the election. And this idea that people, believe that they're middle class, but don't feel like they're middle class, right? I think that's very true and resonates. Experience. And this is, I think, this idea that we're not feeling like we thought we would, right, at this point in our lives, for all sorts of different people at different levels of even economic success. And so I think part of the answer is what you then talked about perhaps being one of the only people in the New York Times opinion desk who has ever had student loans or not gone to an elite college. But, I think the media thinks they address this by talking about the economy. But what they talk about in terms of the economy has nothing to do with the everyday lives of people's lived experience with money. Because the stock market actually doesn't matter at all directly in most people's lives. And so I guess I'd love to hear, I have some ideas about a different kind of coverage that might address that, but I guess because you have this sort of inside view, I'd love to hear about what you see as some of those barriers to like adequately addressing the economy in a way that would make people feel like they're heard and understand the stakes of this in a different way. And if you have ideas about what that could look like differently.
okay, thank you for that. I love this question. Y'all are gonna regret she teed me up on this one. All right, so like maybe, for the last couple of years, no, maybe longer than that, about 3 or 4 years now, there's this political volley going on around inflation, right? Inflation. Still, by the way, motivating a lot of voters, by the way, recent polling on both sides, by the way. Now, when you say to my colleagues, my economist at the New York Times, I should say, Tom Friedman and Paul Krugman, thank you. Tom and Paul, who, and I actually often agree with Paul Krugman on like macroeconomic issues. We diverged on this one, right? So about 1.5 years ago, there was this, we were obsessed in the media, I think regular people less so, with saying, the problem is that inflation is coming down and Americans just don't understand it, right? Because the media is overinvested in the narrative that inflation is a Biden's problem and, they want to critique Biden economics, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I understood why Tom would think that. I was I was interested in why Paul thought it, and then I looked around the room and I realized that only men write the economics columns in major newspapers. Because my understanding of why people were concerned about inflation is because inflation, they didn't care about the economic process of inflation. Inflation had become what we call an economic stylized fact. It was a word that had political power based on who used it, other powerful people, the New York Times, economists, Paul Krugman, Tom Friedman, who say this word is the one that matters, right? But it doesn't matter to them how those people use it. It was just a way to explain what I think is basically a feminist political economist critique of the high cost of care in this country and the complete dissolution of the social safety net, right? People are not just struggling with inflation, they are struggling with child care, elder care, and the high cost of going to work. And when you layered a pandemic on top of that, for the first time, it wasn't just women experiencing that, it was male workers. And so you give them a stylized fact that says your problem is inflation, they go, sure, Because it's the price of bread, which admittedly, bread had gotten crazy. But that makes more sense to them than why is childcare so expensive, right? What is it about the division of labor and how we continue to run how our private sphere is supposed to work that no longer works for people? And again, when there's a vacuum there and nobody's giving you an answer to that, inflation is good enough, right? I read that piece and Paul Grubman and Tom Friedman go off on me, which is fine. But I stand by it. And I think it's gonna hold up well, because here's the thing. Do you wanna talk about that this is a gender, seriously, this is a gendered election? And you need to tell me it's gendered in every way but economic? Right? What is the right for my reproductive control if not to choose when I enter and exit the labor market? Right? I talk to young women over in the business school and I ask them about their career decisions living in a Dobbs America, and they think it is an economic decision. They are making their educational and professional choices based on this. They are making decisions about when and how they will marry and if they will have children at all based on this. That's all economics. We don't cover that as economics. We don't have people who think that way about economics. And in the gap, you have a lot of very smart people, truly, seriously, who I respect a great deal, who understand economics, but don't understand how people understand economics. And frankly, those are two different things. Thank you, I'm done. And I've written it once, maybe I should write it a second time, the first time didn't go so well.
Yeah. People in the back.
Yeah.
See, there's a question over there, yeah.
Hit the button.
I do have a button hit, not working.
No?
No.
Here, you can just take my mic, I'm done. After that,
You
I'm
can-
done.
yeah.
You're good.
Thanks, Felicity.
Thank you, Felicity. You're the
I
best.
love that.
Everyone.
You just gotta press the
The
button.
mics just hate me.
Yeah.
You got Alexa.
The voice is
There
already-
you go.
There we
There you
Yeah.
go.
Everybody thank Felicity real quick.
There you go.
So I got like 9 things I would like to say, but in the interest of politeness, I'm gonna limit it to an observation and a question. The observation is something that the good doctor pointed out, talking about middle class versus working class, that they like sort of identify with middle class, but they are now working class. I would add an element to this that it's also a function of organizing. And you knew what I was going to.
Yeah.
The dominant form of social organizing that exists within our society is predominantly dominated by middle-class institutions. You're talking things like country clubs, churches, like stuff that in earlier times would be described as petty bourgeois, right? But working-class institutions have been eroded down to a nub. Speaking as a proud member and organizer of working-class institutions here in this state for over 10 years. So I would very much echo basically everything else that Tressie said about that. The second question I have is something that you said right at the very beginning. Something about how candidates are, like how the system is set up for Republicans. And again, I largely agree with that, but I would ask something specifically down ballot comparatively to the federal election. How do you account for Mark Robinson diving headfirst into a wood chipper? Because of everything that's happened with him, and his polling is somewhere above gonorrhea, but like just barely, right? Is it just a function of the fact that he just lacks Trump's sort of charismatic juice? Or is it also the fact that he's not melanin deficient?
There you go. I was about to say, you got the answer right there.
All right.
Yeah. So Mark Robinson being our lieutenant governor and running for governor, and by, I don't know, what is our official definition of Mark? For those who aren't familiar,
He's insane.
there you go. Yeah, I mean, and then had, you know, a series of October surprises. They started on him actually in September and just started dropping.
Investigation, like July on.
Yeah, they just started dropping like this, and actually he was holding steady for a while. It was terrifying, to be fair. That which I think spoke to my point, that it's very difficult typical for a Republican candidate to falter when you've got decades of gerrymandering and jury rigging and financial intervention in electoral politics. But yes, Mark Robinson has two problems. He does not have Donald Trump's instincts. That's actually, I think, a broader GOP problem, by the way. One of the reasons why they can't get rid of Trump is everybody they put forward who has his politics but reforms them, they think a little bit more palatably, does not have Trump's instincts, right? And I think there are a couple of reasons for that, but yeah, so he has that problem. He doesn't have political instincts. He's been useful to the state's GOP. And at the point that he stopped being useful, then he lost that infrastructure. And I would argue one of the reasons that it was much easier for him to lose that infrastructure is that a Black candidate simply does not have nearly as long a runway. Not necessarily with voters, but with donors, with the donor class, right? It's a very short runway. And so you stop being useful to the donor class, and I think the infrastructure around you collapses as it has for him. I think about all the council people I was talking to the past week, there's no longer any get out the vote operation wrapped around him. I mean, he's a product of the North Carolina GOP, and when they stopped propping him up, there was nothing left. Yeah.
Who else has a question?
Other questions? Or, and then-
Thank you. So I'm teaching political communication. Daniel and I wrote a textbook on political communication. And when I teach it, I always tell my students that campaigns matter. Campaigning matters. It's not something that parties just do routinely because they're somehow expected to do it, to post something on social media, put up posters and spend lots of money on it. But it really changes things, and you can't really predict elections because campaigns matter, right? And my question now is looking at what's happening. The Harris-Walz campaign is like working so intensively for weeks now on the ground. The Trump campaign spends all those billions on these ads, Harris-Walz as well, but it doesn't move the needle in the polls. And then we hear from Tressie, okay, there are structural reasons also that kind of ensure that the Republican wins. And that begs the question, does campaigning still matter?
Yeah.
So do you think it still matters?
And I think it does. I think the Harris-Walz campaign has the problem that it hasn't been on the ground that long. I mean, you can take the infrastructure of Joe Biden, and you have said for months that he's fine and he's the best candidate ever, and then suddenly you say that the opposite is true, and you do that, by the way, with a couple of issues she does. So it is also a little bit, you need to explain a lot, you don't really do it, and you don't have enough time. But when you see these people on the ground, and when they actually, I mean, it's amazing, these people knocking doors and really trying to, and convincing people, and then I met this young girl in Montana. I was talking to this woman for 45 minutes, and now she's voting for Trump Tesla. So it's, I mean, how many votes do you actually need? In Montana, a little bit more than in Pennsylvania, but to change the outcome. But I think it does. I think everybody wants, not everybody, but it's like in sports, people want to be on the winner's side. And when you feel that there is enthusiasm, I think you kind of, now you want to be on that ticket. If you're not that sure, and that's, I think that's a problem with the Harris-Walz campaign. There could be more. There was more, and there is more in some states, but it looks so technical. It looks so planned. We go to Pennsylvania, we go here and here, and we do this and we say these things in order to get elected. But what voters want is what do the candidates tell us? What are they standing for? Not what they think I want to hear. And I think that comes out with all this perfectionism of campaigning. And you seem to know so much about your voter, but I don't feel it anymore. And then you need somebody who really has the ability to get under people's skin. And Kamala Harris has that with some people, but not with all of the Democratic voters.
absolutely agree, and no freedom to exercise it in the same way. Race and gender matter in that, yeah, I agree. I mean, I wouldn't do anything I'd do if I didn't think it mattered. I think, every election we see, especially down ballot across the country, some election that was won by like less than 1,500 votes. Campaigns obviously matter there. I think at the national level, one of the things that we see, I think Juliane is exactly right. What you're seeing there is campaigning matters to enthusiasm and turnout. And the structure then that favors Republicans means that it's a harder job for Democrats to build the enthusiasm, to get enough of the turnout that they need to sort of overcome some of those structural deficiencies. I was on a call last week, and somebody on the Harris team said that that was important for us to remember that they had inherited Biden's operation to a large extent. They were talking about some of the holes in that. They thought Biden administration has severely under-researched, by the way, like African-American voters, et cetera, in places across the South. They were taken for granted, right? They would have those voters, which suggests then that, yes, something about campaigns does work, because when you inherit one and then you got to try to go execute on it, right? And you've got these holes in it, I think you see some of the outcomes that we see. I absolutely agree. I think that part of the perfectionism, I think, is the exact right way to describe that, of the Harris-Walz campaign. I would even say maybe the professionalism of it, which I would argue is taken sort of like a social media advertising approach. They've got, a million affinity groups and a branded message for each, and it's relying on me never hearing the branded message you're selling to and the people who are different from me. And the problem is I'm hearing all of them. And I know you're doing one for Asian Americans that sounds different than the one for African American men that sounds different from and that's nothing wrong with that per se, but then it makes me question what exactly your real overarching message is. And I do think that, again, some of this is about they're trying to be efficient with a very short calendar, but I also think they're dealing with maybe some limitations with their candidates with that too, which again suggests that yes, campaigns do matter. I'm just not sure that campaigns begin and end when you think they do, and when American voters tune into them. Yeah.
And I think maybe it is true that they start to matter less. And that's probably what I learned about the contest race, that even though he is somebody who beats the odds and who can win, his ability to do that has not become bigger, because people kind of like him. People like what he stands for, but it's not about him, it's about Trump. And that's the whole point. If you make everything about Trump, even on the Democratic side, it is about Trump. And then people vote along party lines because they think otherwise the other side just wants to get rid of you.
Just to add something real quick on this. So like sociologically, campaigns are occasions, right? They're occasions for us to air out these bigger debates, these issues, the connections of people's lives. But I'm glad you said that, because there's been a huge shift in this campaign. When Kamala came out of the gate, she had all the attention, all the energy, and Trump was sidelined, and that we weren't having that debate anymore. But now it's completely flipped back.
Yeah.
So we're talking about whether he's a fascist or not. And part of campaigns are about salience, right? And it's about attention. Somehow that dynamic has now completely flipped, and they have ceded that spotlight back to the Republican nominee.
And she resisted doing it in the debate.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, that's good. Finally, stop jumping over every stage. And now they do it. And it's maybe they really think it's the only chance to get there. But if you do these kind of changes in such a short time, I get confused. What's important now? Is it, and I'm not sure what people are actually going to vote for. And this whole attitude that we have to talk about Trump because people have to remember how he is. Nobody has forgotten how he is. That's a luxury I have not.
Yeah, I think that's true too. So I think what Kamala Harris' campaign's problem was, because I was just talking with the people this past week where we're trying to capture, like, what happened, right? You got 8, 9 strong days there. Kamala Harris, she captured, I would say, like, the major discourse, but was also just like really bubbling up in ways that felt new and exciting. The problem is talking about Trump helps everybody raise money on both sides. And so I think some of this is about financial incentives, right? You want to scare a couple of billionaires into giving some money. If they feel safe, they're not participating. And frankly, they're safe if Trump wins. So you got to do something to scare them on this issue, right? I think, high dollar donors are responsive to the Trump scaremongering campaign, and you're a Democratic candidate who is not, by the way, has not been around the block many times. So you need to both prove yourself as a fundraiser and as that you're electable, which was Kamala Harris's challenge. She had to raise money, and Trump is good to raise money on, and that really works in his favor for getting the attention back. And then I try to be really fair because again, I think the stakes are very high, and some of this stuff really does not matter. But I do think that Harris and Walz have some, they're not seasoned at this level, and I think that became really clear after a couple of weeks on the ground. It could have used maybe a little bit more time and a longer ramp. This is one of those places where I actually think the primaries would have been very good for Kamala Harris to refine her message and talk to people. She didn't get that. She's never run a race like this before, and I think we're seeing some of those cracks.
It sounds dangerously like a post-mortem, by the way.
I'm so sorry. I don't think I was.
And I mean, the question is always, is this election again about change? And she cannot be the change to what has been in the Biden-Harris administration. As much as she tries, that is not going to work. So it's got to change? No, it's just to roll back. But that was what she did at the beginning. We don't want to go back, we want to go forward. But now suddenly we are back. We are talking about history, about John Kelly. Who's John Kelly? So, no, right?
It's not clear what we're voting. It's not clear what they're asking.
That is exactly right. That's right.
All right, there's a question.
Yeah.
We get to start to rip. Here we go.
All right, thank you so much. This was great, so insightful. Jacob Biedigen is my name. I'm a visiting professor at the Department of Political Science. Given the fact that we've spent so much time speaking about what Trump does well, right, and trying to explain and kind of disentangle kind of his appeals to many different kind of voter groups, I think parts of our workshop, which I found to be appealing, was trying to address the question, what can Democrats kind of develop as a counter narrative to kind of his image of where America is at and where America has to go next. And I think I'd be interested, given that this is also like a panel that has a transatlantic perspective into it, like moving into it, if you see your reporting, like what is the Democrats' capital D counter narrative to Trump's kind of very consistent, and this is what makes it so threatening, right? It's very consistent and oftentimes promoting like these easy solutions to very complex, phenomena. What can Democrats do, right, in terms of their counter narrative? And one thing that got me thinking, like again, with this great panel and discussion was, like, what might be different around for this election, which matters compared to the 2020 election, was that Trump is now not the incumbent. He's now styling himself again as someone who has to kind of, push back against the Democrats' agenda and like their kind of, powerful years in the Biden administration. So, in 2020, the rhetoric kind of, we have to save democracy might have done the trick to some extent, right? We need to kind of address the Trump years in office. That does not seem to be as appealing now with Trump, running not as the incumbent, but as the challenger again.
And if we have an answer, we'd be much wealthier than I think we are sitting up here. What you got?
I like the rhetoric. I thought that was to talk about the future. I mean, sorry, there's so many issues, AI, we don't talk about. So we find the same battles that we have been doing for 8 years. And I think that's lost time. My time, your time, everybody's time. I know that Trump is bad, so move on. So tell me what you are going to do. And she's not doing that. She's doing it in parts, but she's not doing it enough. I think you have to be, it's not easy because I think big parts of the Democratic Party want to be more progressive. And she's scared of that because she doesn't want to be put on the progressive line because she's afraid that she cannot hold the big tent that Biden has held. But we can see that and feel it. What do you want to be? Do you see the injustice? Do you want to do something against it? Do you want to make your pledge for the American people, or do you meander back and forth? What do you want to be? And I think that's, I have to say, yeah, maybe you lose even more if you are brave, and I think that's why she's so careful. But I think people smell that there's a fear of coming down and saying what you actually want to do, and I think that's wrong.
Okay, so we have like 5 minutes left and I see 2 hands. So can we bundle our 2 questions and then give you all the floor? Yeah.
So I guess in the interest of bringing crass materialism back to the conversation, I think it needs to be said at this point, the polls are entirely unscientific, and I'm not a social scientist by any means, but I think that's consistent with rules of social science as I understand and generally disregard them. Like, if you're getting 1% response rates, I don't think you can generalize that. It's like, oh, you got 300,000 people. Also, I don't think you Americans are allowed to claim proportional representation from your turnout in voting, because the 66% is not 100, and therefore the country is not divided in half, it's divided in thirds, and the average American does not vote. So from that, it starts to look a lot less scary in terms of, yeah, Trump has a hardcore that caps at like 40%, that's like 25% of the population. In the interest of crass materialism there, I guess, how are we thinking of polls and this sort of social scientific discourse as race and gender in the same way that the language of the economy is, as sort of like, I hate to use the word elite, but like a form of elite social reproduction, rather than like grappling with this material reality that we don't know, or like we do because of all of these other indicators, but the reach to that faux empiricism there, I think, is indicative of like a grasping, and a white grasping, if I might say so.
Yeah, I'm not mad at that. I'm thinking through here. So I think one of the things I say is that the polls aren't mathematically wrong. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, this is the distinction I think that I'm saying. I think the conflation that happens, and, you know, was just listening to like a poll of all polls, you know, where they're averaging them, and that's mathematically sound. It's fine. Again, it gets you published in a journal. I can't believe I'm getting ready to quote James Carville, here where I am. He recently said in an interview, I think he had a point, he's like, listen, he was complaining about the extent to which polling had overtaken electoral politics, which he did take a little responsibility for. You know, we relied on them at a time when it was a much more robust indicator, but it's become professionalized to the point, and it's a campaign career, it's a political career to do that type of polling. And he says, you know, he thinks that it's not doing a very good job of shifting realities, which coincidentally, I think honest mathematicians will even tell you, polls are much more robust when it's predicting in a stable environment. Now, to the extent to which you think ours right now is shifting enough for the polls to be totally disregarded, I don't know, but I wouldn't say totally, but I do think that they have right now an outsized place, given what we know about the limits of probability statistics, and right now electoral behavior.
I think so too. I mean, it depends on what you expect from the polls. The polls can tell you this issue is voters like this issue or not, or like this person or not. They cannot tell us who's going to win the election. They can't, and we can't say this and write this often enough. But I also think it's a huge mistake of political class and actors to test every political message first with focus group and messages. I mean, why should I vote for somebody when I don't know if what he does actually is what he believes in? And maybe that's naive, and maybe that's because I'm from a small country, but I kind of think politicians should be like that. They should have visions, they should put out there and let the majority for it. Not put the missions and bring them to in like a nice package and sell them to the voters, because the voters already know that they like this mission. That's not visionary, that's not moving forward. Then you're not gonna change anything.
Last question, Alex.
So I want to talk about the double standard that the press has when covering Kamala Harris, who has to be flawless, versus Trump, who is lawless, right? The idea that Kamala has not put forth like a positive vision of what she wants to do is not actually borne out by her policy positions or, many of the press that she's done in the media. But I think there's still this perception that she has not done enough to tell us what she's going to do, and the other candidate is not, he has hand waving, he has a concept of a plan, he has nothing, right? And I find this double standard incredibly frustrating because it's obviously race, it's obviously gendered, but yet we all know that it exists and it persists. And I would love to know what y'all think about why this is such a persistent problem in the way the media covers these two candidates.
I think voters, I think his voters don't want that. Maybe they read Project 2025. I'm not sure. But they apparently want to hear it from her. You could see it and hear it yesterday in the town hall. People are asking questions. Who are you? What do you want? What do you do about my problems? So I think, I'm not sure it's a double standard. She wants to win and she needs to get the votes. And if there is a longing for more information and more feelings and more knowledge, I would say she has to do it. I don't think I can write lots of political articles about Donald Trump, but I'm not changing anything anyway, because my newspaper is in Germany, but it's, I think that's overstating our power. I think people have questions who she is, and that's not, it's just because it's how it is. This has not been out there with her visions that much, and for his voters, apparently it doesn't count.
Yeah, I think it's true. And so one of the things, we get a lot of reader email. One of the things I find interesting, and I think it is borne out in research, is that Democratic voters have a conceit of themselves as being issues voters, right? We do it. It's us. We do it, right? Do your research before you go, right? Have your pre-printed ballot and figure out where you are on the opposed amendment issues. Whether we understand them or not, I think is another thing entirely. I think there's a lot of stylized facts going on and a lot of projection, but we have a conceit of ourselves that way. And I say that because I get, letters from readers, when they talk about politics, who they've got the solution. Has anybody ever thought about X? And I know and it's fine, it's okay, but I think that is far more common among Democratic voters than it is among Republican voters, and that has not always been true. I think that I think we actually lose this with George W., by the way, but until then, I think there was a similar conceit on the other side, right? That they understood small government better, or foreign policy better, or something like that. One of the things that Trump benefits from, though, is I think the decline of that among Republican voters. I think enough of them, maybe not all of them, but enough of them do not care about issues and don't care about being perceived as people who care about issues. So when you've got that climate, you've got a media climate who is trying to capture attention in a place where Democratic voters want you to flatter them on details, and Republican voters want fan mail. And so you give each of them kind of what they want. Is that a double standard? Yes. And I think there's a second sort of attenuating issue of, what we know about women trying to lead in public life that I think is absolutely happening. But frankly, we saw the same thing with Biden. Biden really only skated because of COVID. We saw some of the same double standard of Biden doesn't have a clear plan on this, and that I think is about some divide about how much the Republican voter has changed in their perception of themselves and what they need to be considered a voter.
And with that, please, a warm thank you. Thank you all for coming out. Don't forget there are books in the back, copies of Dick, as well as a CTAP volume meeting on January 6th. And stay tuned for other events from us. So thank you all. Oh, right. Yes, on Tuesday, we are doing that. And Charlotte. So this is our way to control this. All right.